So I'm happy to welcome back Robert Kirk. I thank him for driving down this morning with his wife Vicky. Thank you, Vicky, for coming. They drove down this morning from Victorville to be here. It was about this time 2 years ago, you may remember, that he was here talking about his experience in Vietnam in a program called What We Learned About Air Warfare in Vietnam. But today he's going to talk about more peaceful times. He and his wife Vicky just retraced with their own aeroplane the route that you see up there, which was the original Lindberg line route, and he's going to talk about that today. Robert is a holder of a PhD from the Oklahoma University. He's taught for more than 40 years since. He is a Vietnam War vet flying F-4D Phantoms, and he wrote about his experiences during that war in a book called Warriors at 500 Knots. In the summer of 2012, as I say, his wife, he flew the Lindberg line, and it's about that he's going to talk about today. He is an author and certified flight instructor. He continues to fly and teach, and I'm very happy to have him back. He has written a book about this experience, I haven't read myself, so I can't personally endorse it, but I'm sure it's a great read. Flying the Lindberg line, it's called. He's going to sign copies for anyone who would like to purchase one after the meeting. So, welcome back, Robert, and thank you for coming. Come on up.
Okay, I think I turned on the microphone. Can you hear me?
No.
No? Yes, I did. I had one button push.
That's it.
All right. Is that working? Okay. He's going to adjust it for us. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I see Patrick's English is continuing to improve. It's always good to see that. So thank you for having us here. A few years ago, our youngest son went to the University of Arizona, and we would fly in there at the airport and go through the executive terminal, and we noticed a plaque on the side of the wall there that had something about Lindberg and airlines. Well, of course, I knew something about Lindberg, but I didn't know he was involved with airlines. And that's why we went in there 2 or 3 times and decided to stop and read about it. And it was very interesting that he was involved in setting up the first airlines, transcontinental airlines across the United States. So we decided that we wanted to research this, find out what actually happened. I didn't know what happened. And my wife and I actually flew the route from California all the way over to Columbus, Ohio, retracing his steps and stopping in all the airports that are still open, taking photos of those that are still open, those that aren't. We would still visit them and take pictures, and then stop at museums along the way and airports, and working with the Smithsonian and getting historic photos. We put together this book, and then having to do with our trip of what Lindbergh did. We have over 225 photos, historic and current, of these airports and major historical events during that time period. So let's talk about this. We all remember 1903, December, the Wright brothers first flying at Kitty Hawk. But do we remember that they only flew for 120 feet and their flight lasted for 12 seconds? Reflecting back, that's not, very much, but it changed the world. It was a big event. Well, in 1911, a pilot decided he was going to fly across the United States, be the first one to do that. So he talked with the Wright brothers. He actually purchased 3 of their aircraft, 2 for parts and 1 to actually fly. They loaned him their mechanic, who was the one that built their engine for them. And he went with the pilot, and they started their flight across the United States. It took them 49 days to fly across, and they had 16 crashes. And by the time they finished up, the only original part of the airplane that was left was the rudder, the engine oil pan, and a single wing strut. So it didn't endear flying to most people in those days, which was, of course, a very hazardous undertaking. Well, we've all probably flown on airlines, probably around the world, across the United States. But this was not always the case. And in 1928, there was no transcontinental airline across the United States. There are a few interstate, intercity airlines, but very few. So in 1928, a company set out to change all this. Some of the backers that backed Lindberg across his flight, Spirit of St. Louis, across the Atlantic, they helped bankroll this along with some other individuals, and they decided to start this company. At the time, the only way across the United States was by train, and that took 4 days and 4 nights to travel 96 hours to do this. There was no road, no paved road across the United States. Even Route 66 was only authorized in 1926 by Congress, but it took a full 10 years for it to be paved across the United States. So the only way to do it was to take the train until this company, Transcontinental Air Transport, or as known in those days, TAT, which eventually, through mergers and evolution, became TWA, started this first transcontinental route. Well, they had several major goals they wanted to achieve in aviation. One was they wanted to make travel luxurious, just like on an ocean liner, even on trains, where the Pullman service was quite luxurious. They also wanted to provide on-time service. Imagine that. Of course, in those days, the trains were known for being on time. We all remember the saying, you can set your watch by the trains. Not so today, maybe, but in those days, yes. They wanted to cut the time across the United States to 48 hours. They wanted to cut that in half. So that was their goal. They wanted safe travel. And as I mentioned, in those days, flying was not thought of as being safe. The aircraft were made out of sticks and cloth, and almost anyone who flew much at all either had injuries themselves from accidents or lost friends because of crashes and accidents. So they wanted to make it safe. They wanted to develop the largest aviation weather service in the world, private aviation weather service, and they did that. Next, the National Weather Service. In fact, they rivaled the National Weather Service at the time for what they accomplished with these weather stations across the United States. And they also then wanted to develop air-to-air, air-to-ground, and ground-to-ground communication systems so the aircraft could communicate and they could keep track of them. So today we're going to take a trip from the East Coast of New York across to Glendale, California on TWA or TAT in those days. Our travel is going to begin by train. The Pennsylvania Railroad put on a special train for TAT called the Airway Limited, and it left New York City at 6:05 p.m. and it traveled all night to Port Columbus, Ohio the next morning at 7:55. The reason they had two legs that involved the train at night, and that was because by regulation airplanes couldn't fly at night. They didn't have navigation abilities. Of course, they didn't have even the radio ranges. They didn't have the beacons across this section. And they, of course, didn't have lights at the airports. So it was very, very primitive. The TAT set about to resolve all this. And they hired Lindberg to be their technical chairman to help set this up, select the aircraft to use, and so forth. So we're going to be traveling now 14 hours from New York City to Port Columbus. This is a picture of the inaugural day, leaving in New York City, heading to Glendale, California. And what happened, they started from Glendale, heading east on the same day, and they started in New York, heading west the same day, with two airplanes on either end, meeting going across the United States. Well, on this one, this is the Airway Limited coming out of New York, and this person is Amelia Earhart. She was on the first trip heading westbound, and she was also hired by TAT to try to interest women in aviation and in flying. So she would write these little articles about how to wear your hair, what kind of hat to wear, what kind of dresses to wear, any slacks, and so forth. To get across flying on the airplane. Okay, here we start.
great railroad station marks the beginning of your transcontinental rail and air journey from coast to coast. Here at one of the windows we buy our tickets to California, as simply as we would ordinarily buy just the rail ticket alone. Then, at the gateway to the train, friends see us all. There's a new kind of spirit in the air each day when this train departs. It's like those moments before a smart deluxe liner sets sail for Paris and the Riviera. And at exactly 6:05 p.m., the Airway Limited, first and only train of its kind in the world, with a direct airline connection, pulls out with its air-minded guests.
Okay, so we're heading now to Port Columbus. We arrive at 7:55 a.m. The passengers walked from the new terminal that Penn Station built there at Port Columbus, which was about 100 yards from the new terminal building that was built at Port Columbus. And they would walk across to the terminal, and from there they would board the Ford Trimotors, which were the aircraft that were selected by Lindberg. He looked at all the different aircraft worldwide and selected it for several reasons, but the biggest reason was it was the all-metal aircraft. It was the first all-metal aircraft built in the United States. And it had 3 engines, and they liked that idea for safety. In case they lost an engine, they wanted to promote safety. They even advertised that it could lose 2 engines and still fly. I think it just flew it to the location of the accident, but anyway, they advertised it. This is what the covered walkway was from the train station here, which is brand new. The passengers would walk up this ramp into the terminal building. This was characteristic of TAT. They put these roller awnings out for all their passengers, and then it would roll back up after the passengers came. And they used this all across the United States. This is what the terminal building looked like in 1929. This was actual inaugural day. This is a white cream building with an observation tower on top. These are 2 of the Ford Trimotors that were going to be heading west that day. This building is still there. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. It is on the National Register of Historic Places. It is being renovated right now. When we saw it a year and a half or so ago, it was in really good condition, but they're rehabbing it again, and they're going to have a grand opening on it, I think, in July 2015. We're hoping to be there for that event, but it is an absolutely striking architectural building. There were several dignitaries that were there during the inaugural flight out of Port Columbus. Of course, Henry Ford, that you're familiar with, of the Ford motor car. But as you may or may not know, he was interested in aviation, and so was his son, Edsel Ford, who influenced his dad toward aviation. And he actually had his own couple airports. He had his own airplane designer, a man named Stout, that worked for him and helped ultimately design and build the Ford Trimotor. He flew one time in his life, Ford did, at Dearborn, Michigan. Charles Lindberg landed there in the Spirit of St. Louis, and he asked Henry if he'd like to go for a ride, and he said, sure. They put a wicker chair in the back of the Spirit. He climbed in, he went up for about 30 minutes, came back, and never flew again. So I don't know what that was all about, but anyway. Of course, Harvey Firestone, he worked with the Fords. He made tires at Firestone Tire Company, and he was big in helping, of course, Henry Ford and his enterprises. Unfortunately, Edsel Ford died very young, but he was quite a promoter of aviation and influencing his father.
Airway Limited pulls into Port Columbus, where our first day's flying will begin. At each of these air terminals, we find unexpected comforts and conveniences, beautifully appointed restrooms, and courteous attendants who look after our traveling needs. Here at Port Columbus, our baggage is weighed. 30 pounds is the allowance. It is 8:15 in the morning now, time to take off. The big tri-motor all-metal plane is ready and waiting, equipped like a Pullman car. Its roomy cabin is well lighted and heated in wintertime. Seated in our comfortable chairs, we are all set now to see America best. The field rushes by, then all is flowing smoothness. The city of Columbus, Ohio quickly passes under us, with a majestic skyscraper serving notice on air travelers that other cities beside New York have their symbols of America reaching upward. We are on our first hop to Indianapolis, 180 miles to the west, less than 2 hours by air. The courier is looking after our comfort. Souvenir maps are spread before you. You begin to look for familiar landmarks. Arriving at the airport at Indianapolis, and at this same time, at every airport along the route, the teletype system reports the news on our progress. Here at the general office, they read the flash of our arrival. And so through the day, mile after mile, our plane is watched, reported on, prepared for our next stop.
Okay, as you notice, you've got 30 pounds of luggage, and by the way, you didn't have to pay for your luggage to go with you. Okay, so we arrived in Indianapolis, Indiana at 9:13 a.m., flying 178 miles, and landed at Stoutfield to refuel. They were only on the ground for 30 minutes. For 15 minutes. And so you had to really, really hurry. If you needed to use the restroom, you had to rush in and rush right back out. They were able to refuel before tri-motors in 5 minutes. They built special trucks that could pump 60 gallons an hour. And they tried to keep to these schedules, and they were very, very good at being on time. All the stations, TAT stations, had weather stations and radios, and the pilots were required to get a weather briefing during that 15 minutes, and they had a printout that they received from teletype. They'd cut the strips and glue it on a sheet of paper, and it had to be under 1 hour old. TAT had that as part of its regulations. Here's passengers boarding. The four tri-motors had two pilots, a first pilot and then second pilot and a courier. The courier was to help with the needs of the passengers, feeding them and helping them should they get airsick and so forth and so forth. The Ford tri-motor could hold 18 passengers, but TNT decided that they wanted to have more comfort, so they took out 8 of the seats and they restricted them to 10 passengers. So you had a lot of leg room in them and you can move around. This is what Stoutfield looked like in the day, 1930 or so. It looks pretty much like that today. It is not an airport any longer. A couple of these old hangars are there. This building is gone. It is the home of the Indianapolis Army National Guard. A couple of runways and exits were built over the years, but now they have Humvees parked on top of them and other trucks and so forth. The International Airport is about 5 miles to the west from here. But they were very nice to us, and we were able to get some nice pictures of it. Okay, now we're going to leave from Indianapolis to St. Louis, Missouri. Flight time is 2 hours and 35 minutes.
For our next stop, which now will be St. Louis, 232 miles away. 2 hours later, nearing St. Louis, we see the Missouri and Mississippi rivers joining into one. Then a long, smooth glide to a landing, to another 15-minute pause in our journey westward. We are taking this trip in the wintertime. As a matter of fact, it is 8 below zero as most of these scenes are made. But modern air travel is a year-round accomplished fact, and airliners nowadays are as snug and comfortable as your own private yacht. Here at St. Louis, you step out again for a stroll around, while the motors are being inspected and additional fuel is put aboard. These motors, incidentally, are looked after as carefully as a fine watch. And after being in use for a specified number of hours, each motor is completely overhauled by a corps of experts working under the supervision of Colonel Lindberg. As technical advisor to the airline, Colonel Lindberg has instilled his own insistence upon perfect motor performance, overhauling frequent replacements, which from his experience is the way to safety in flying.
Lindberg selected were quite an advancement. He credited them with his successful flight across the Atlantic, and they had a TBO, time between overhaul, of about 500 hours, which was quite a bit more than the old Liberty engine. It had about a 50-hour TBO, and if you didn't rebuild it, it would seize up on you. So this was a very reliable engine, and that was one of the reasons that he selected it for the Ford tri-motor. Okay, now we're going from St. Louis, Lambert Field, to Kansas City. We do change flight crews at St. Louis. On this leg of the flight, the courier would serve a box luncheon to the passengers on aluminum tables with lavender tablecloths, cloth napkins, and they would have a delicious box lunch, which was prepared by the Fred Harvey Restaurant Company, which you may or may be familiar with. They did the Santa Fe Railroad, the Harvey houses along the routes, and also the National Park Service. And they had a great reputation for quality food. So once again, to try to upscale the service, TAT hired Fred Harvey's company to prepare these box lunches and in-flight meals. Now, something I didn't know prior to starting the research on this, but TAT was the first airline to show in-flight movies. I thought that happened only 4 or 5 years ago, but so what I know. They developed their own projector and screen. They developed their own high-powered bulb that was battery-powered to show the movies. Their own little screen they put up in front of where the pilots are, and they would show the current movie tone newsreels that I'm sure a lot of us remember from days they went to Saturday morning shows and watched Randall Scott and Gene Autry and all those, Lash LaRue, and then the movie tone newsreels in between, and a cartoon, Oswald the Comedy Cat, which that really wasn't the proper title, but I found that out later on. But Oswald was, if you'll notice here, was developed by Walt Disney. Walt Disney at the time worked for Universal, and he was developing caricatures, and Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was his first caricature that was financially beneficial. He actually made money off of this first cartoon called Oswald Trolley Troubles. And so let me show you this. Well, as you probably can see, Disney went to Universal and said this was a financial success, I want a raise, I want more time to do Oswald, and they said no. not only are we not going to give you a raise, but we're going to take Oswald away from you. And so Disney got ticked. He quit Universal, and he and his brother started the Walt Disney Studios. And you can see from some of the characteristics here that his next caricatures evolved out of Oswald, Steamboat Willie, and then ultimately Mickey Mouse. It's an interesting story. In 2010, the Disney company decided they wanted Oswald back in their camp. So they approached Universal, offered them several things, Boardwalk, Park Place. Anyway, they agreed, and Oswald came back to them. And so now they own the rights to them, and they're starting some games now with Mickey Mouse and Oswald in the same games. And if you go to California Adventure, stop by Oswald's. Here he is, and they are starting to promote him. And I have a few pulls at Disney, and courtesy of them, I was able to bring Oswald in today, so he wanted to say hi to you. This is what he looks like. And he's back in the Disney camp now, and everybody's happy. This is Oswald. Okay, the movie tones. Remember they're narrated by Lowell Thomas?
This is Lowell Thomas speaking, flashing to you the news of the world, pictured by Fox Movie Tone.
Okay, those were what they showed in flight, 2 locations going east and west across the United States. Okay, here's the old administration building at Kansas City. It is gone now, but at the Kansas City location, there's a famous building that was built there by TWA. It became well known, and it became the office spaces for Howard Hughes, and when he was developing the Super Constellation. Anyway, it is still there. The building is owned by an FBO, fixed base operation, Signature Aviation, but it also houses a TWA museum upstairs. And so when we landed there, it's staffed by retired stewardesses, and they all came out. We had like 5 or 6 of them come out, making all over us and showed us the museum and took us to lunch. Really, really, really nice people. If you ever have a chance, stop by the museum there. It is at the airport, the old airport. Okay, so Kansas City now to Wichita, Kansas. Our flight time is an hour and 54 minutes. The Ford Trimotors were usually fly pretty close to the ground, 500 feet to 5,000 feet, depending on the winds. The Ford Trimotor, we got a ride in one in Vail, Arizona, and they advertise that it takes off at 98 miles per hour, it cruises at 98 miles per hour, and it lands at 98 miles per hour. Well, that's just great unless you get into a 30-knot headwind or so coming across. And so to help with that, they would get as close to the ground as they could to try to make a little time. TAT did really have a beautiful passenger lounge in Wichita. Unfortunately, it burned to the ground in the 40s. We do have pictures of it in the book, but it was a beautiful place. And a lot of movie stars would stop there. In fact, a lot of movie stars would ride TAT.
Now aboard our plane, a dainty and satisfying luncheon is served aloft. 5,000 feet in the air, at the speed of more than 100 miles per hour, we'll travel at least 90 miles before we even arrive at dessert. Air travel, you soon learn, is like ocean travel when it comes to stimulating a healthy appetite. We are now passing over Kansas City. We come into land at its convenient airport. Then on to Wichita, Kansas, 173 miles as the crow flies. Westbound westbound lane calling radio ground station at Wichita.
TAT Maddox, radio ground station at Wichita, answering westbound plane.
Westbound plane reporting position. We are now passing over Granville.
Okay on your positions. Are you on time? Go ahead, please.
We are flying exactly on schedule. We'll arrive Wichita on time. What is the surface wind at Wichita?
The surface wind at Wichita is east-southeast, 8 miles per hour.
I like the way he made his position report and looked out the window and see where he was. Well, they had all these radio stations and weather stations, which was really something for the day. I mean, that was really cutting edge. When TAT set up their company, they put $5 million into the business right away, and they invested $3 million in infrastructure, weather stations, radio stations, and so forth, and did a lot of research to make their radios really good. And they really made progress in their range. They could go 400 and 500 miles in range, they reported, and also in their weight. They could cut the weight down considerably. Okay, now we're going to leave from Wichita, Kansas to Anoka, Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma, so I can talk about this. The flight time was 1 hour and 13 minutes. You arrive at Anoka at 6:24 p.m. During the day, the population of Anoka was about 1,500. Today, it's about 1,500. But it's an interesting place. When we went there, I know it because when I was in high school, I grew up in Oklahoma City. They were known for their rattlesnake hunts annually. They would have rattlesnake hunts, and I went to a couple of those until I came to myself and realized that that was not a smart thing to do. But they're really into TAT. They have a beautiful museum there. They've restored the old Harvey House, the Santa Fe Depot. The Santa Fe doesn't stop there anymore. It does go by there, but it's a beautiful place if you have a chance. They have some nice exhibits there, including one on the Hardy girls. They have a Hardy girl room all set up, just like it was in the day for the girls to stay in there. When you landed there at Anoka, they would have an aero car that we'll talk about in a minute that drive you to the Santa Fe terminal, and there they'd have a Harvey House dinner, what my mother would call sit-down dinner. Tablecloths and napkins and just really, really nice dinner. They had a station there so passengers could take showers and clean up. They would be stationed there for 4 or 5 hours. They had a big dinner. You could walk around town. That wouldn't take you long. But after that, then you had your Pullman car. You could go get into it, and then you would leave at 8 p.m. to head out toward New Mexico.
We are in Oklahoma now. We have traveled almost 1,000 miles by air. As the sun sinks down into the west, an aero car whisks us to town where an appetizing dinner awaits.
Okay, this is what the aero car looked like. It was a trailer, but it was actually built by Glenn Curtis. TAT contracted him. You know about him from aviation, a real giant in aviation. He also held the world speed record on a motorcycle. I don't know if you know that or not, but he built his own motorcycle, put a V8 engine on it, and he went 136 miles per hour. Gutsy guy. But anyway, he built these and actually opened a plant in Florida and started building them. To me, it looks like the Airstream. Yeah, it looks a lot like those. They were pulled by Studebaker coups. TAT bought 12 of these to pull them around, and they put one of these at each of the stations. This airplane right here, this particular trimotor, you can't see the numbers here, but it is the city of San Francisco. TAT named this aircraft after the cities it stopped in, and later on they added San Francisco. But the city of San Francisco, this photo is either the last or the next to the last of its flights. It did run into a mountain west of Albuquerque, Mount Taylor. We'll talk about that in a minute, but anyway, that's the aircraft there. Okay, from Winoka, Oklahoma, we're going to get on the missionary train, which is the Santa Fe train that was designated to leave from Winoka for an all-night trip across Texas. And that's a good way to see Texas. Sorry, being Oklahoma. I can't resist. My wife's father was from Texas, and when she went from New Mexico to the University of Oklahoma, where we met, his comment was, honey, there are at least 100 high schools in Texas that are better than the University of Oklahoma. That sealed it, she came. Okay. TAT actually purchased land 5 miles west of Clovis, and they built an airport there. And then they built a terminal there, the Santa Fe terminal. So when you landed, they would put you in the air car, drive you to Clovis to the Fred Harvey restaurant, and you have 30 minutes to eat, and then right back to the Ford Tri-Motors, and off you would go. This is what the terminal looked like, the Santa Fe terminal right outside Port Columbus Field. You can see they still were finishing it up. This only was Clovis and Winoka only there, used by TAT for about a year. And because of the speed of aircraft and so forth, they started bypassing these. My wife and I were able to find a historian there in Clovis, a very, very nice gentleman. As a kid, he would come out here and play. He knew the location. He was able to take us there. We found the original side rails, tracks here, took pictures of them, and the foundation of this building. It is gone now. But the airport itself was purchased by the military, and now it's Cannon Air Force Base. So, kind of interesting fact. This is what the terminal, the hangar looked like there at Clovis. TAT built some really, really nice hangars. Here it is there, Ford Tri-Motor. He worked there in the Aero car over here on the side. Okay, heading to Albuquerque.
You will sleep aboard the Santa Fe Railway. Morning finds us in Clovis, New Mexico, where another plane with new pilots and a new kind of countryside await our second day's flight. Today the rugged West will unroll beneath you. But though there be rocks and deserts and mighty mountains everywhere to your untrained eyes, your pilots know this route as you know your way home. They know that within easy gliding distance, there is always a landing field to be used if necessary. 191 miles of scenic beauty. We arrived at the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay, this is the airport in the day. It had several names. One was Oxnard Field, the other one was Albuquerque Municipal Airport. These two buildings, hangars were built. This is called Hangar 1, Hangar 2, and this was the TAT terminal right there. And this was a pass that they had to fly over. There's interesting stories about that. But all this land here now is part of Kirtland Air Force Base. This hangar is still used by the Air Force. This hangar is still there, used by the Air Force. I think it's this one that they're using for their emergency vehicles. The TAT terminal is still there. It is a federal credit union, the Sandia Area Federal Credit Union. So we got permission to go and take pictures of all this and go on, out of this area, which is pretty much just field right now. But when we went to the credit union, it was interesting. A woman who's the CEO there has worked there for almost 25 years. And we walked inside in the foyer there's a picture of what it looked like inside during the day. Lindberg's picture up on the wall and so forth. And they had inside, but she had no idea that this had a connection with Lindberg or TAT, her building. She had no idea about that. So it was an interesting visit that we had with her about this. This is what it looked like in the day, and they've changed the facade some on the front of it. But it's still the same building, and they built another building to the east of it where they do most of their credit union work, but these are offices in here. And here is that covered patio I was telling you about. And here's one of the tanker trucks that they developed for TAT to pump 60 gallons a minute. Here's what that photo looks like inside. Characteristic, they had all of these along the Lindberg line with Lindberg's picture over the fireplace. Beautiful, beautiful structures. They've modernized all this now. They put false ceilings in and so forth. It's sad. But anyway, it's still there. All right. Heading to Winslow.
Leaving Albuquerque on a 240-mile hop to Winslow, Arizona, we fly over the Mesa Gigante, then on through a bank of silvery clouds, round the tops of the San Mateo Mountains. Now, certainly you are coming to country worth writing home about. Next, the Pita Desert swims into view, colors of violet, amber, and rose. To the north, the petrified forest of Arizona. To the south, the Apache Indians' favorite hunting grounds. Here also was the hunting ground of Billy the Kid, that famous bandit of the wild and woolly West.
Okay, as I mentioned, the city of San Francisco was the first major airline crash. When it happened, and it took them 5 days to find the crash, they sent out, of course, actually thousands of people to search for it and hundreds of airplanes. And when they did find the site, they sent a photographer, painter, who was in Gallup and then moved to Albuquerque. His name was C.R. Willis, to photograph the accident scene. And we were fortunate enough to get permission from his grandson to use the photos of that accident scene. And we got really into this and did a lot of research and went back to primary sources on what happened with the crash and so forth. Anyway, those photos are known, but this movie was not known. When Willis went there, he took the photos, but no one really knew that he took these moving pictures of the crash site and so forth. And we found them at the Palace of the Governors in New Mexico. And anyway, I won't go through this a lot, but it's an interesting historical find. I'll stop and show you the first trees that the city of San Francisco hit, tore off one of their engines, part of their wing, and then you start to see the debris field. That's Mount Taylor. We've flown over that, taking pictures of it. We got the crash site from the National Park Service, so we were able to get some nice photos of that. They had hundreds, like I said, thousands actually of Indians and cowboys roaming the scene. The weather was really, really bad for 5 days, rain, mud. They had to use donkeys to get to the crash site, but they did finally find it. It was found by an airline flying over. And this is the crash site. And here the wing hit, this was the first tree it hit, and knocked off a section, as I mentioned, of the wing and one of its engines. And then after that, it was about a 200 to 300 yard debris field and the crash. All were killed on the crash. They theorized immediately, even though there's a short fire afterwards, they think all the passengers and crew were dead. And here's the N number of the city of San Francisco. Okay. Anyway, you spent a lot of time in the book talking about this. Interesting. Okay, here we are going to Winslow. This is what the terminal looks like in Winslow. This is the only one of the terminals that is still there. It is in operation. It's an FBO. It's owned by the city, but an FBO leases it, and it's a really, really beautiful structure. They kept it up nice. This wall right here, one of the photos we found from Smithsonian, has Charles Lindberg sitting right here, and has Will Rogers sitting right here. If you remember who he was, he's an Oklahoma boy from Claremont, Oklahoma, and they were sitting eating their box lunches. The story is that Will Rogers was airsick, so he asked Lindbergh if they could stop to eat, give him a chance to settle down, and they agreed to it. And anyway, I was able to secure that photo from the Smithsonian, even though they didn't know they had it. And that's an interesting story. I knew they had it, but they couldn't find it, so I had to search it down for them, tell them where it was. But anyway, my wife took a picture of me sitting right here where they were sitting, and it's in the book, and I think it's kind of cool. But anyway, it's easy to impress me at my age. Here's the hangar that was there in the day, and it's still there today, except they have a sign across the top that says TAT Winslow Lindbergh Field. They've kept it up, and really, really nice area. Okay, now from Winslow to Kingman, Arizona, we are served dinner with china, tablecloths, and really nice meal.
Your next stop will be Kingman, Arizona. 186 miles on the map, just an hour and a half to you. On one of the many souvenir postcards of your trip is a picture of the famous Meteor Crater. We are coming to it now, a mighty hole 3 miles in circumference, which scientists tell us was made by a falling star. At the bottom we can see the huts of the geologists who are digging down to the treasure of which they say this meteor contains. Then with a suddenness that thrills, great chasms and canyons flash into view. A ruggedness and a beauty which only air travelers are privileged to see. This is the famous Dean Canyon you've heard about. A pair of binoculars brings into view its giant fingers of varicolored stone, like a mighty pipe organ in a cathedral of the gods.
Okay, this is what the Kingman Field looked like on Inauguration Day. There's the terminal right here. This was the taxiway going out to the northeast southwest runway. This is all built up now. The airport's all gone. The terminal is still there, the building. It became a senator's home from Arizona, and then after he passed away, it was sold to a man and his sister, and now it's a oil field drilling company, but they know what they have. They're taking really good care of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful structure. And just another point of fact, this dirt road running through here, right here, became Route 66. This is what the building looked like in the day, and the sister told me that they have a section of this remaining. They took it down about a month before my wife and I got there, put it in storage. It's the only one I know that's remaining. She said, if you let me know ahead of time, I'll put it back up sometime so you take some photos of it. So we're looking forward to going back and doing that. This is one of the tank trucks I was telling you about that were built so they could refuel Ford Tri-Motor during that 15 minutes of ground time. All right, now we're heading for Glendale, California.
We're leaving Kingman, Arizona now, for the last hop of our trip from coast to coast, 300 miles to the city of Los Angeles. We will have crossed the country in less than 48 hours. Passing over the Colorado River, which forms the dividing line of 3 states. In the bend of this river, we can see a part of Arizona, Nevada, and California. Then a vast stretch of desert lies before us. The Devil's Collar in the Mojave Desert of California. Death Valley lies 60 miles to the north. These are the lands over which the pioneers struggled in their covered wagons. Where once it took weeks and months to cross this vast expanse, we are now winging our way across little more than an hour's comfortable flight. You're nearing Los Angeles now, but a great range of mountains separates you from your first glimpse of the Pacific Ocean. Passing over the last of these mountains, you see the famous observatory on top of Mount Wilson. Next you will see orange groves, then sunset on the Pacific and the city of Los Angeles. You are nearing the end of your trip. And so,
Spoke up a little bit, Cincinnati.
flying from New York and the east, arriving 4:20 on time.
On time?
Okay, this is Glendale, California. This is the terminal building. The airport is gone now. It's all been torn up, and it's an industrial park area, mostly dedicated to the movie industry. This terminal building, though, is a beautiful, beautiful building, and it's still there. It's owned by the Disney Corporation. It's all boarded up. They had plans to renovate it, but they shelved those plans. I asked permission to go in and photograph it. They told me no. I did it anyway. But it's a beautiful building. If you have a chance, go down and see it before something bad happens to it. I think about that guy with the megaphone. I could see Homeland Security arresting him today. Okay, well that's it. That's my book. I'm shamelessly capitalistic, but there it is. And if you're interested, we'll have some signed copies available for you. You have any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
What would that trip cost, you think?
Good question. He's a plant. No. It cost $350 one way, which was about the amount it would cost to buy a new Ford Roadster in those days. So when they first opened up, it was really for the rich and famous. And so people who are rich, movie stars, people, you know, that was their thing. But what happened, of course, they started in July of 1929. What happened in October 1929? Yeah, the stock market crashed. And at the time, there were 10 people who wanted each of the seats on TAT, but then it dropped way off. And so what TAT did was they cut the fares in half, and shortly thereafter they cut them in half again. And then it now made it affordable for people to travel by air. And the airline industry then just took off. TAT started having to buy bigger aircraft, and other companies got involved, and then it just took off and flew. Sorry. Yes, any other questions? Yes.
I noticed there's a variety of leg lengths that they were flying. It seemed as they got further west, the legs got longer. Is there a reason that the legs in the center part of the country were shorter? I don't know what the range of the aircraft was.
The aircraft could fly longer, but one of the things they tried to do was hook up with the railroad where they could in case something happened. They did have spare aircraft, but not at every location. So what they would do if the airplane broke, they would put the passengers on a train and send them ahead, get the airplane fixed, and then catch up with them. So part of it had to do with that, but other parts of it had to do with the airports. There were airports in the east, but they weren't in the west. So TAT had to build Winslow, they had to build Anoka, they had to build Kingman, they had to build those airports. Glendale was here, and it was a really nice airport at the time. Had the first concrete runways. Yes.
You say you flew that yourself?
Yes, my wife and I flew it.
TAT must have had a lot of money backing them. I mean, good grief, they talk about some of the things that they did.
Money was not a problem for them. They got together and they teamed up with the Pennsylvania and Santa Fe railroads. I remember I was reading some of their initial meetings. They talked about what it's going to cost, and their chairman said, money will not be a problem. And before they left that day, as I mentioned, they all committed $5 million and didn't borrow a penny of it. And so there were some rich dudes who were putting money behind this and made it work. Well, thank you very much. Oh, yes.
Was the crash a structural problem or?
No, there was a thunderstorm sitting out by Mount Taylor, and that's very common for that area. My wife and I, she's from Albuquerque, so we fly that area all the time, and so you have to watch that. And they had, of course, once it happened, this will shock you, so be seated. A congressman decided we had to have an investigation. And of course, he heard rumors that the pilot had been forced to take off in another thunderstorm and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, they did a real big investigation. And I went back and read the original weather reports for the area, and they weren't progging bad weather. But Mount Taylor can generate its own weather conditions, being right, thunderstorms and so forth. Anyway, we don't know for sure, but they were following the railroad, for navigation, and it took them close to the mountain. And I theorized one of three things, but I think what ultimately happened was he was flying underneath and he hit what we would call today a microburst, and it just pushed him into the ground. The aircraft wasn't on fire, and when it went down, it was intact. And so that's probably the best scenario, that he was weaving his way in and got pushed down. Yes, sir?
They have attitude indicators in those days?
Altitude indicator?
Attitude.
Oh, good question. They were just developing those. And as you know, Doolittle was the first to have a blind flight with those. And within a year of them starting this company, they were installing those and actually giving them instrument training. But when they first started, I don't think many of them had those. Just needle ball and airspeed. Yes, sir?
How many pilots did they have, and did Lindberg actually fly some of the routes?
Lindberg flew the initial route from Glendale to Winslow, and then he picked up the eastbound flight coming back. His wife was with him, a couple movie stars. Who was it? Gloria Swanson and her husband, which was Fairbanks Sr., and they picked them up and then they headed back. And they started off with 10 first pilots. They all had to have, quote, a minimum of 3,500 hours, 500 in tri-motor, and then they would hire the second pilots coming out of the Army. So that's how they got their little pilots.
What kind of airplane did you fly on the route?
Oh, we have a little Beach Sierra. Yes.
On a flight east to west, they got the sun with them, which gives them a better flight time. Did it take longer going east because of the short day?
It took them longer because of the winds going west and shorter going east. But they worked really, really hard at trying to stay on time, and they usually were pretty close. And Lindberg flew that route for a year, almost a year himself. He flew a Ryan Brome, which is kind of a civilian version of the Spirit of St. Louis, and which was the same speed as the Ford Tri-Motor, and he flew that to set the schedule. So they knew, and then they flew it for about a month and a half, 2 months with the Ford Tri-Motors before passengers to make sure they got the times down right. So they really did this right. I mean, they spent a lot of time and money doing it right. Yes, sir?
Yes, the city of Pasadena sent me down here with the war.
My name is Patrick. I'll surrender myself at the end of this. Yes, sir?
In the film, it said that it referred to Lindberg as Colonel Lindberg. He didn't become a colonel until after World War II. But when did he become a colonel?
when he was in the Air Force in the 30s.
In the 30s.
He got promoted very, very quickly as his fame. Once he flew the Atlantic, it was interesting. Right before he flew the Atlantic, up to that time, he had parachuted out of 3 different airplanes. He abandoned them, because of weather or whatever. And the FAA was considering taking away his license. And then he flew the Atlantic, and they decided, well, we probably won't do that. Well, thank you very much. You've been a great group.